Good morning and welcome to the third and final day of the Smart Cities Pillar at the AIM Congress. I'm Lauren Holtmeyer, MC, and thank you all for joining me. City planning at its core is somewhat ubiquitous. Every city aims to provide the same basic components to its residents. From food and water to transportation and healthcare, the fundamentals are largely the same. But the way in which we interact and view those cities has changed over the centuries, and cities are once again on the precipice of major change. The rise of new technology, including the Internet of Things, blockchain, and artificial intelligence, means that we have new tools at our disposals that could lead to the complete reimagination in how we interact with our cities. We also have more data than ever that can be used to learn new things about our cities in ways never before imagined, if only we can learn how to harness that data. Those new technologies have arisen in tandem with new challenges the world is still learning to adequately confront. Climate change will lead to millions of new displacements in the coming decades, and those climate refugees are likely to settle in cities, exacerbating urban sprawl. This often strains natural and land resources, and cities need to understand the challenges that lie ahead so as not to be overwhelmed by massive shifting populations. According to the World Bank, there will be a greater need for more affordable housing, better connected transport systems, basic services, and more jobs. Meanwhile, cities already account for 2/3 of global energy consumption and account for more than 70% of greenhouse gas emissions. It is with some irony that the global hubs that we look towards to create solutions for climate change are some of the worst perpetrators. With challenges mounting and cities expanding, we need new ways to build resilience to safeguard our cities from future shocks and disruptions. By 2050, 2/3 of the global population will live in cities, and innovation is a critical element to ensuring these places that billions of people call home can continue to provide those core elements: food and water, shelter, jobs, transport, education, and healthcare. With that, I would like to introduce our panelists for the day. I am looking forward to what I'm sure will be a great discussion, and I think I will let you introduce you guys yourselves because you know you much better than I do. So with that, I will turn it over to y'all.
Good morning. Maybe I'll begin by introducing myself and then each of you can. So I'm Pratap Padode, Executive Director, Smart Cities Council, India. Good to be here.
Good morning, everyone. Matthew Britt with Honeywell. I'm the Global GM of Smart Cities and Communities. I'm responsible for our global business, including what we're doing here in the Middle East, and happy to be here.
Corey Gray, I'm Executive Chairman of LVX Global. We're involved in smart cities and smart buildings, Internet of Things, and end-to-end solution delivery to hopefully solve some of the challenging problems we're going to talk about today.
Morning, I'm Saftan. Good morning, I'm Saftan Nazir. I'm Senior Vice President for Digital, Huawei Middle East.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Sanjeev Subedar, President of Datamatics, and we have quite a bit focus on smart cities, especially on the digital side of smart cities. And that's all I would like to say for time being. Thank you.
Well, so with these kind of panelists out here, I think the stage is set for new discoveries. So I was just noting some of the challenges that the Internet of Things has thrown open to the world, and these are quite standard. So interoperability, privacy, data protection, security. One other feature would have been equal opportunity. So once you have the power of the Internet of Things, you also have the responsibility of offering equal opportunity. And then the assimilation of all the data that you're going to make happen is going to throw open a new set of challenges, something that was lying dormant until this was discovered. So the integration of all the data that you assimilate throws open a new animal, which you need to then decode and find solutions for. So what we are going to do, we're going to discuss IoT's ability to scale and aggregate data. And we're going to ask each of our panelists here on what data they have aggregated, analyzed, how they have used it, and what have been the outcomes. We can start with you, Matt. Would you like me to sort of switch to some of this? Yeah.
So Honeywell joined the Smart Cities journey back in 2015 timeframe, when we launched our business in India. And, predominantly it was around a public safety type use case where, we're trying to help improve quality of life, improve the citizen experience, and be able to, help people feel safe and secure. But as we've moved along that journey, we started touching on a lot more things, right? There's the ability to create a truly smart city is to be able to act on data, to be able to make better decisions and give the opportunity to, truly improve the lives of residents and visitors and workers. And so, what we have done and why cities have relied on us historically, around the world is the ability to pull in all of the various subsystems that create a city and keep a city running. And there's of course a big focus around urban mobility within that, and the ability to effectively move citizens, workers around the city more effectively, more sustainably, and be able to provide equitable access to those, perhaps the underserved of the community. And so the ability to give the visibility on how people are moving around the city and where we need to focus most of our attention within a platform that can give not just the, say, transportation department or, public safety or any one, city services the ability to see how their own operation is doing, but really be able to give leadership the ability to see how the city is functioning across the city. Taking it from there and being able to really truly engage with the citizens who live there to be able to, get them more involved, help them create new opportunities for themselves by getting to work, getting to school, being able to rely on the existing infrastructure that's in place as a city, begins to move towards, move further along in their smart city journey.
And have you seen the, your clients then therefore utilize these facilities for the full scope of, the sort of facilities that you've offered, and any outcomes that you could probably cite?
Absolutely. We can immediately look to the new capital of Cairo for that, where, they have literally built a city for the ground up for 8 million people that are relocating to that area. And, the ability to give the analytics and the detail around, improved response times, be able to, know where and when to deploy resources to be able to, to serve the needs of the citizens and those that work there have been, a real powerful story. But, when we say shift over to India, for example, and with the city of Bangalore, where the platform has been live and active for since 2014, you're talking about in many cases an 80% reduction in response time, based on how things used to be, right? Before implementing these technologies. So much so that they recently awarded a new contract for us to put in a new system altogether, and expanding upon what we have done historically with them to really outfit the entire city with a new network of safety and security solutions to be able to help ensure the lives are safe and secure. From a traffic standpoint, not just helping people moving around the traffic, but be able to increase revenues within the city 20% from accurate toll, violations, and through the camera networks in place, being able to determine, is somebody driving the wrong way down the street, and be able to accurately bill accordingly, for the fines and tolls and things like that. Simply by pulling the data together, making it available so that the city can make better decisions and serve their citizens.
Sanjeev, can you share some user case study where you think that people have actually utilized the offerings that you've made?
Well, thanks, Pratap.
Can you just take the mic closer to you? Yeah.
Hello? Is it better? Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Pratap. Datamatics came into smart cities, I would say, as a natural progression, because right from 1995, almost 27, 30 years back, we got into smart or automatic ticketing. And that is where we started. But for any city to become smart, if you see, the most important, one of the early movers into so-called smartness is the transportation systems. And it naturally became for us because the travel was becoming more and more automatic. The people were trying to use the initially smart cards, magnetic cards, then it became the even credit cards, and today some cities in the eastern part of the world where privacy is not that big an issue want to get even into face recognition as your ticket. So you really don't need to carry anything, and that's probably the limit up to which these things will go. And obviously, to cope up with all these expectations of people, we kept developing these technologies, and that's how we got into smart cities in a very natural way. Today, we have maybe 20, 30 projects where it touches. Another aspect of transport is, unlike many other things of the components of smart city are the, let's say, the parts that people consider as smart, the transportation systems touch everyday life. Whomsoever travels, he experiences the technology himself, versus a fire department doing some analysis is few people doing something, whereas this touches. And this generates hell of a data, because some of the cities, maybe 3, 4, 5 million people travel a day on a transit, and you have lots of data this way. In fact, I always argue with a lot of experts on digital twins for the cities that without plugging in the transport data, the digital twins are really not perfect, can't be perfect. Because in some cases, 10 to 30% population is in transit, and if you don't know where they are, then what kind of twin or modeling you can do? So obviously, it makes good case for this thing. And many of these projects have made these differences. They have changed the way people behave, the way people travel, the way people approach the business, because this touches everyday life of every people. And I think we did contribute a lot in this area in many projects, and some of the projects are very proud project for us. Thank you so much.
Corey, would you like to?
It's just about to have a drink of water then, Pratap, and you got in the way. So to take a different angle, our organisation's involved in infrastructure, but also built form assets and the interaction within them. I think you can see on the screen here the types of areas that we focus on, which in the end I often ask myself, is smart city actually even a thing? Because cities, since they ever started, just tried to make safer communities, more activated communities to work and play with a baseline of resilience and sustainability. So all that's really changed is that we've got more information and we've got better tools. We talked yesterday about aqueducts being transformational in the history of cities. They really were, by creating foundational infrastructure. So And our view as people who try and do the thinking with clients around the technologies that, you know, Honeywell's and the Datamatics and Huawei's are making is to be involved in the thinking and the interpretation of the data that comes out of their technologies, and to work with clients to make sure they're delivering optimal social benefits. So other examples of that, and one of the things we spend a lot of time talking about as well, which seems odd initially to people, is beautification. Matt and I were talking before about cities like Vienna and Paris where people feel different, and if we're trying to deliver well-being to communities, which is what we are through health and education and housing, beautification is spiritually transformational. So if we can find ways, for example, to use data, Phil, as we do, that we can give back public space that was allocated to other infrastructure by being more efficient, to make parks, to put trees, to urban forestation. That is an important contribution. So there's a project we're working on at the moment, which is a very significant long-term, 20-year greenfield site being turned into residential, commercial, retail, hospitals, universities, where the questions come up about how can we design our cities more efficiently, how can we design our spaces more efficiently. So to the point we're making before, if you can demonstrate with data that things like anaerobic digestion can reduce by 80% the amount of waste that's being produced from a building, and you can get the governments and the planning authorities on side with that, you can take all that space and use it for something else. You might activate it economically if you're a property developer and put more apartments, or you might put more shops or real estate, or you might use it for public space if you're a municipality and put art and sculptures and playgrounds and green space. So, that's one example where the data that we managed to gather is contributing to what we've now called naturehood in this project, which is, and then if you can start to work with data around well-being, for example, and we're having a discussion this morning about that, you can then tangibly demonstrate and benchmark your community against others, that people are happier, more employed, sleeping better, healthier, less likely to be overweight or have health complications because of these key drivers within the community. So there's a lot of ways outside of, the raw sustainability stuff that we get, save water, get cars off the road. The other one with waste management that's really important is that trucks that come and take waste away consume a huge amount of energy. They're horribly inconvenient for people who are living in the area. You don't want to be sitting in a cafe when 4 times a day a truck is taking rubbish away right next to you. So that general amenity all feeds back into the overall satisfaction that citizens have with the community. So dealing with well-being aspects outside of the known objectives like save water, save power, are really, really cutting to the nub of well-being, which is what we're trying to achieve with the Smart Cities movement.
So all the data that we can gather in order to enable a better life for the citizens there. So we need to alter the way forward based upon the data analytics. So Safdar, can you tell us, has this data gathering helped us change the course of the future? As in, so we are running lives in a certain way, we are running a project in a certain way. We gather the analytics, and then we see that there is a certain inconvenience to citizens, or there is something that is happening which needs a change. Can we bring about that change? Because then we are changing the outcome.
Yeah, sure. So let me pick up on a couple of things that the other panelists have also spoken about, which is traffic, because it's an easy type of use case. And if you get to previous slide. So Shenzhen is a real mega city. It's a metropolitan population of more than 20 million. And it's grown up from a fishing village 40 years ago to an economy bigger than Hong Kong. So that means that a lot of people have moved there in a very short space of time, as probably all of the development challenges that any city has in a very condensed time frame. One of those being traffic. As you can see here, this is actually a real case of taking, it's quite easy in a small location to control traffic lights within a few, interchanges. Right? But when you're doing that across a mega city, that requires a good amount of capability in data modeling and AI. And without building any new roads, the impact that we've been able to have with something we call Traffic Go is, as you can see on the screen, reducing the congestion times by over 12%. And for such a large-scale city, that means a significant change. But what it also means that we're able to do is the real-time modeling of where the traffic is and the scenario planning. So what would happen, and the city planning can then do that in not just a digital twin, but what we would call an intelligent twin, which is to be able to model what would happen if I put an extra lane there, or if I built a new road in this direction. Where is the traffic moving from and to, and at what times? So that's a basis, a base case which is quite applicable in most cities, and what my colleagues saying about getting cars off the road. There is an impact for that as well when we look at it holistically from an economy perspective, because somebody needs to buy cars and there's a whole industry behind that. We might then say, well, we need to go to electric vehicles, and so there's various arguments, and the holistic view means what's the total impact of it. And there are cities that want no cars, like Neom, and Huawei is deeply involved in Neom and has been for some time now in building up their infrastructure as a cognitive city, which is about using AI in everyday type of processes. Now, here we're just talking about one input of data, which is video, in terms of IoT. But if I break down IoT into three domains, one is video or computer vision from an AI perspective, sound, and there's a lot of use cases that we do on sound, and I'll explain one of those. And the third is what I call IoTX. These are the sensors that you can't do with video and sound, like maybe a temperature sensor or a soil sensor or something like that. And what's happened over time is that we've moved from what I call IoTX sensors to more video. I'll give you an example. Even 5 years ago, we'd talk about doing parking using sensor in a street and maybe using narrowband IoT as a communication medium and then being able to do the analytics in the back end. We're now doing full citywide parking, smart parking solutions using video and analytics. And we're doing that for the whole city of Dammam in eastern Saudi Arabia. And when it comes to sound, it's quite well-known cases around nature protection where we're using sound sensors in jungles and forests for listening out. There's a particular case around spider monkeys who make a certain call when they're distressed. So we're able to hear that sound, or if there's any chainsaw for cutting down trees or illegal logging, that's going up to Huawei Cloud. The analytics is happening in the cloud and then sending a message to the park rangers to be able to go and check out what's happening. And that's all happening in a very short space of time. And that's what we can do with sound. There's a number of other use cases that can happen with sound. And then there's the traditional IoTX. But more use cases are moving to video and sound that we might have traditionally done with just a what I call an IoTX sensor. And now, beyond just the IoT platform, because the way data aggregation is working now, we'll be heading towards what we call Data Lake 3.0, which means that in some cases, and I've even had this discussion with some of the megacity projects in the region, we don't necessarily need an IoT platform because the data can be aggregated directly into a data lake, and from there, which is real-time data, you can do a number of things from that.
There was an interesting point you made about a city that's growing at speed, because a lot of the time we think about data being, the traffic comes and goes in the morning or day-by-day data, but the trends in cities, there's an assumption in the smart city movement that being in a city is a good thing. But I think we've seen through COVID in particular, 46% of the world doesn't live in a city. Should they? Probably not. If somebody doesn't have to drive 2 hours a day from Newcastle to Sydney to work each way, and you can get data and get actionable insights to allow people to stay in their communities, near their families, and not put stress on critical infrastructure like roads, electricity, water, because of a burdensome population level, then that's hugely valuable to communities, because, again, it comes back to that intangible part of not having to move away from your family to work, to stay with your friends and the people you know and the place that you are. So there's this virtuous cycle of taking more longitudinal data and getting insights out of that to determine that maybe we don't need our future cities to be bigger. Maybe we can take back those roads and create an urban forest instead of adding another lane on the freeway by creating a different way to live. So there's a lot of more interesting and very interesting and rich longitudinal stuff if we just keep going back to the problem we're trying to solve is improving people's well-being overall. Maybe it's not through building more apartment towers and bigger freeways and electric vehicles. Maybe it's by being able to do things that don't require that in a different way.
So I
Let me
think
pick up on that. That's an interesting point.
Yeah, go ahead.
And what we're seeing is that actually, and with COVID, it's really helped people to have a different way of living. And people can choose to do that, and people are. So we've had less travel, and the impact from a technology perspective is that there's something called the carbon handprint, right? And the carbon, it's just a technology uses about 2% of global carbon emissions, but it has the potential to offset 20% because of not having to travel. So when you do a meeting remotely and you're not traveling, so it immediately means that you're having a less impact on the carbon emissions. But again, it's we shouldn't get hung up on it being a technology solution. So what problem are we trying to solve? And the livability aspect, which I think is what you're trying to say, is how do we deal with livability? Technology has a role in enabling that. It's only ever an enabler of what we're trying to achieve.
Right. No, so Matt, I wanted to know, I think the built environment actually has a great potential for saving resources for the city, particularly on the energy management. Now, with all the cities actually gearing up for the climate action plan, isn't that the biggest resource saving that actually can happen in material terms? Because finally the cities have to be sustainable, and that can really help push the agenda forward. But I don't see as much focus on that. What has been your experience?
Yeah, that's actually a key new focus area for us at Honeywell. I mean, buildings in general consume, or generate 40% of the carbon emissions, that exist today. But what they don't have, and what typically, when you look at cities who own and operate a lot of buildings today, they don't really have resiliency infrastructure in place that is clean, that allows them to really take advantage and execute upon the sustainability goals that they talk about all the time, right? And so, the ability to leverage what is new in terms of, clean energy, whether it's wind or solar or hydro or, other, but be able to capture that and store it within, to be able to have either buildings or community centers or wastewater treatment plants or, any of the typical critical infrastructure that if a typhoon or a, tornado or something came through a city and took out power and the ability to provide clean water, they got to be able to do something about that. And so with what we are doing from a smart city perspective, is leveraging the same platform that we serve urban mobility and public safety with, but leveraging assets that we have in other parts of our business, from battery storage capability, to be able to take the alternative fuel sources and power sources, store them, be able to provide all the visibility management and control on those assets, so that if it's a natural disaster scenario just in and of itself, they have the visibility to those assets. They know that this group of people, typically the underserved of the community that may not have anywhere else to go in the event of a crisis, they can continue to provide services to their citizens to both provide clean drinking water, but also be able to provide shelter, to be able to continue allow children to receive education, or people to work, or in another part of the city that frankly aside from diesel generators and that some cities have, not all cities, in certain places, are not really being accounted for today. And cities love to talk about their sustainability goals by a certain date, but when you really go look at what they are actually doing to be able to make any sort of meaningful change in that area, there's not been a whole lot of progress.
So speaking of which, I want to switch to the next thought that we had on pilot projects. So I think one of the concerns we have is that when projects are dependent upon the success or failure of a pilot project, they're actually set for failure. In the sense that you're not sure and you just don't want to limit your resources. Sometimes, yes, of course, you are testing out some facet of a particular technology or something like that. That might be fine, but generally, this pilot project issues. So, but there have been others which, not by design, but by the way things panned out, become extremely successful, extremely scalable. We had this thing in India where we launched the LED street lights program, which was launched in 2014 in a place called Puducherry for retrofitting. That has scaled up to nearly now, I think, 11 million street lights, starting from some 10,000 street lights to 11 million, and that has even brought down the price of LED bulbs, crashing down because of the kind of scale that they've been operating on. And of course, saving and each city, when they install now, and they are all trying to make this, the funds accessible to them so that they can install street lights. And the payment of the capital expenditure is through the savings that they make in electricity. So that was something that actually didn't really start off as a pilot, but it became so. So I wanted to have your views on what, Safdar, you want to go first?
It's one of my favorite topics, POCs and pilots. So one of the things that I always try to remind customers and cities about is that a POC means a proof of concept. So if the concept's already proven, I don't need to prove it again. The point about street lighting, this should be a no-brainer, right, for people, especially in existing cities. In fact, we're doing the whole of Medina converting it all to LED lights and solar power and so on. So one of the good things that certainly in this region, which is quite surprising for a lot of people, is that each of the countries pretty much has a very strong now plan for sustainability and some clear targets by net zero by 2050 or 2060 in most of the countries, and to increase protected areas and so on. So for example, some of the giga projects like Red Sea, Amala, Neom will be 100% renewable energy. In fact, last year, Matthew was talking about battery storage. So we're doing 400 megawatt of solar inverter in Red Sea, plus 1.3 gigawatt hours of battery storage, which is by far the largest battery storage in the world. And when you do that, then you can manage that in a way which is part of your, let's say, data in the city, because you know exactly where your generation is, where your consumption is, and it's something we call the energyverse in a way. It's a step towards metaverse. So to know all across the city, and one of the things that I advocate for is distributed generation. And it's a very easy thing for city governments and municipalities to make a building regulation to say that every home should have its own distributed generator, even if it's 5 or 10 kilowatt. It's a contribution to the reduction in load. Not only that, is that if you do have a power outage, if you've got 10 kilowatt, you can run your fridge and your lights and so on for a while, right? And you don't necessarily have the same kind of disaster situation that you might have had otherwise. So you're more resilient as a city overall. So where there's a known like lighting and things like these, do not need pilots and POCs. Just get on with it, right? If it's something new, you might need to do an MVP or minimum viable product, right? And then you go on from there. So I'd say pilots and POCs for the new stuff, existing things that are done, just get on with it.
One of the challenges, and again, sitting at the front end that we have, is cities with procurement frameworks that are very rigid. And so the challenge, like we've just spent with a city with an absolutely compelling business case, 18 months helping them work out how to buy it. Right? It's unbelievably constrained because, to your exact point, they need to get a validation not just from somebody else, third party. Somebody says we need an internal validation. Then they design a project that's too small to give true insight into the outcome. If you're going to design a pilot, you've got to have the operational framework around it as well, not just prove the tech. The tech works. Do you have the people with the skills to operate it? Do you have the infrastructure that's going to carry the future cost? There's a whole lot more to it. Do you have a contractual framework that's going to work? So it's not just where a lot of them fail is that people look at the tech and then it works, but they haven't got a framework that once it gets to scale, they're going to be able to get any value out of that technology. And the other bit about street lighting, which we're involved in a lot, is a lot of the business cases are purely about energy. You know, we go from 20 lumens per watt, we're going to go to 100 lumens per watt. Our luminous efficacy is much higher. What we're seeing in our advisory roles with a number of cities with smart lighting is no one looks at the embedded energy cost in their business case. So if you're buying a luminaire where you need to take it and throw the whole thing away at the end of life, then you've got a problem. A lot of things are getting sold on the life of the LED, and we've seen a project recently where the LED is 100,000 hours, but the drive is 25,000 hours. So the effective life is not 100,000 hours at all, or you've got to factor in the cost of changing that component 3 times before you get to the end of your business case. So you want things where components are modular, where they can be replaced, and the true total cost of ownership of all that embedded energy of people coming and going and changing is factored into the business case. But if you do something for 3 years, that model won't scale financially or environmentally. So part of it is just people not conceiving of, to your point, either running things that don't need to be run all over again, or not conceiving of the true nature of the operation and the longitudinal value of the project, I think.
Yeah.
I think also it's important to note, you know, when you look at the slide here and you're talking about, you know, ultimately the concept of pilots and POCs failing from the perspective of, you know, just the perception. The community here is not prepared to change organizationally, but it's often because the community doesn't even know anything about it. You know, we're trying to help the community become smarter, become, you know, operate more efficiently and create a better quality of life, but the citizen isn't really actually involved in the process at any point in time. You know, you have a small group of people trying to make decisions that they think is best without that community engagement. And so, you know, for us, I think, you know, what we try to do, you know, particularly is like in the United States where we've, you know, recently launched our North American business, you know, it's really taking that multi-stakeholder approach, you know, both, you know, from a, you know, public-private partnership standpoint with utilities and otherwise, but also that community engagement piece to really, you know, help the resident understand why, you know, why do any of this? What's in it for me, right? And, you know, and so you're going to go spend a lot of money implementing these kind of technologies that, you know, on paper they look really good, but how am I going to take advantage of doing it, right? And so trying to bridge that divide where, you know, there's desire to innovate, but, you know, some of the smart city stuff can be scary for people just kind of thinking about it, you know, conceptually, you know, as a resident. And so really just trying to educate the citizens of a city goes a long way in the process.
Yeah, so I think like marketing of that benefit. So a lot of people would be like scared in terms of privacy, security, when you put up CCTV cameras. Now they ought to know that what is possible for somebody to actually take out from the system. I mean, so for example, in one of our states, in India, in Maharashtra, we have a law that any footage that needs to be taken, there is a proper procedure through court. You got to apply to the court to be able to get that. So then you know that, okay, it's going to be secure whenever you're seeing cameras. Sanjeev, why don't you tell us about some pilots that you've done?
Yes. So I think
Let's take the mic closer to you.
I think most of the panelists touched the key aspect of why these pilots, what are the fallacies or why do they fail. And one of the important thing which we have realized, and I have seen more failures than success, but I will try to share the crux of the failures and then the successful one. So more often than not, the goals of these pilots or these POCs are not clear. They feel that they want to see if the technology works, which is rather easy to see because you may have seen similar thing working somewhere else. So what are you proving? The problem comes is that what is the outcome that you are looking for, and if you are not fully sure that what outcome you are looking for, you are probably experimenting just for sake of it, and then you don't know whether it is successful or not. Technology work, did it work? Yes, it worked. But did you get the outcome? No, we don't know. So that's where the fallacy lies, that you are not sure what is it that you are trying to prove. So that fallacy is one thing which we have seen in many cases. One success story where the pilot was very constrained because they did not have money and they still wanted to go ahead, but they somehow didn't have much money for pilot. And we changed that. What we did was we said that for the pilot, you put very specialized people and those who are subject matter expert. And rather than doing a pilot for, let's say, 200 people or a certain spread, we do it with just 30, 40, 50 people, but they are all experts, and do it for a very short time. That way the money was less, the engagement was short span, and the learnings came up very quickly because they were more experts in those areas. And then it was scaled up and it worked very well. This was for the city of San Diego, where they wanted to see if the app-based journey planning is feasible and can it work or not. And this is how we did. And this is one successful example, but of course, as I said, that I have also seen a lot of unsuccessful stuff because the outcome is not clear. Technology works, but the outcome is not what they didn't know what they wanted.
Just quickly, sometimes the outcome that's desired is a photo opportunity. That we've done a POC, we've done a pilot, taken a picture, put it in the media, and then we forget about it, right? And or somebody got re-elected, or it's a part of an election campaign or something like that. So sometimes we need to be aware of really what the background drivers are.
And if you go back to that whole thing that smart city needs to be human-centric, data-driven, technology-enabled, too often the proof of concept looks at the technology, not what it's meant to be doing. So there's significant reasons why these things aren't actually valid or applicable to the solution you're trying to solve. If all you're asking is, does technology work? There's often not a lot of thinking around what it's meant to be doing. We have a city at the moment in Germany we're advising, and they decided they wanted to be a smart city. They got many, many millions of euros from the European Union, and they surveyed cities around the world and said, if we buy these 15 technology verticals, we'll be smart. So we've sat down and said, who are your stakeholders? What are their problems? What are their opportunities? What are you trying to do? And they said, we don't know. So you've got to go 2 years back to start all over again and decide if any of that stuff's going to help them solve for their problems. And it's a very common situation.
No, so can you cite, Corey, any example where we've just gone full scale into implementation of a much larger project without actually having the need to explore a pilot?
Yeah, we were talking on the way here about a particular transport infrastructure project, but again, to your point, we got to a point with that government where we could show validation in other proofs of concept where they didn't need to run that process anymore, and we came up with a due diligence process that was based on other people's pilots, and not just looking at what good looks like, looking at what bad looks like as well is just as important when you want to execute on these things. And a lot of people only want to see the big shiny things that work, but like with medical research and physics, and we work a bit in space, you want to know the things, what made the rocket crash as much as you want to know what made it fly. So we run a process on that front end where you sort of, what is the problem we're trying to solve for? there's tech everywhere, there's money everywhere, and the constraints are typically around governance, procurement, and then just not getting a full understanding of the problem you're solving for. And then, we could get that government to immediately go at scale with a proven business case based on pilots of other people, which comes to another point, which is information sharing, which there's not enough of. And there are organisations where people can come into one place now and actually 10 cities can work together to solve one problem. And instead of them all paying $500,000 for the same report, they can share it and then they can move faster and accelerate the outcomes and not need to be each running the same pilot over and over and over again.
So, use of simulation models to know which way at scale a certain project will actually pan out, whether it be, so for example, in India particularly, where the population is fairly large, to be able to actually anticipate exactly how the crowd movement will take place once you've built certain infrastructure is too difficult to predict right in the beginning. And therefore, on the fly, as you're going forward, when you start to gather information, you keep room for such interventions which can then fulfill the needs of the sort of the public at large. Matt, any examples of that kind or something?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that multiple times in India, right? Where you launch these kind of AI services, AI ML services, where ultimately your goal is to be able to predict traffic flow or predict ridership, in public transportation, or even predict events, incidents before they happen. And when you first start off with them, the level of accuracy is less, right? But then a month in, 2 months in, 3 months in, it's been learning. And so, you may start out at 70% accuracy, 70 to 80% accuracy, but then, by the time that either that POC or the actual deployment itself, has been in process, then, at least, our solutions, are able to, get over 90% accuracy in terms of, it could be violations. It could be, just, predicting, okay, at 9 a.m., you're probably going to need to go around this way instead of, your normal way to work, just based on, the historical fact, barring some major incident that, just kind of derails, the concept.
Right. Do we have time for, yeah, I think we can go. Yeah, so maybe we can take some questions. Questions from the audience? Yeah.
Does anyone have questions? Okay, great.
Thanks, guys. A quick question is sometimes there's, in terms of livability, which came up a few times today, sometimes there's a tension between things like transport optimization and livability. And there's a question about sometimes what we're optimizing for, and we can run really great models, and maybe we need to build more transit lanes, etc., to ease congestion. However, that can indirectly sometimes make communities less livable. Sorry. No one wants to live right next to a freeway necessarily. Motor cars have perhaps destroyed livability more than anything else. Not saying that we don't need to optimize transport, of course we do, but there is sometimes this tension between like what we're optimizing for, and keen to know how you think about that in your models.
I'll throw one thing in quickly, because we tend to live at the Y level, and there's an assumption that people need to go from A to B all the time. But go one step back, and instead of making faster trains or trains that fit more people, and say, why are these people even going there? Which is the point that I was touching on earlier. Why am I going from 2 hours this way to 2 hours that way to do something that I could do quite ably here with a far smaller infrastructure here? So to dwell on that why question, I think, is fundamentally important, rather than just say, here's more highways, here's more trains, here's more planes. Another one is in building design, where we've designed a workplace today that's super efficient. There's elevators, travelators, So people go to work all day and then they leave work and go to the gym because they've used no energy all day because of all of these efficiencies that we think are virtuous that we've designed into our urban environment. Where if you just took the stairs, like people used to, we wouldn't have 60% of Australians and Americans overweight and obese, for example, and so much commercial real estate allocated to gyms and making gym equipment and doing all that stuff that 3 generations ago no one would ever have contemplated an urban environment like this. We institutionalise our children, we institutionalise our parents. It's bizarre, it's hopelessly inefficient. So to your point, getting that really high level of why are we doing this, to get a bigger television or a bigger car, and then to go right back to the question of well-being, are we delivering well-being for our community? Often technology isn't the answer by any means. It's just think a bit smarter, stay home, have Nana with the kids, be together. There's different ways of living that I think we want the data to start to talk to, not just how to solve, just assuming the how is the problem.
I think, starting with the outcome rather than the technology is critical, right? Because when you're starting with the outcome and trying to solve for the way you want things to be, but then bringing in the community that is, more than likely going to take issue with 1 thing, 2 things, 3 things of the plan, right? But you've got city planners out there that are designing things in their head, in a vacuum without that feedback and, over time. I think that, that's where I mentioned earlier, being able to get in early before, just someone decides to do something and finds a technology vendor or, some sort of solution provider, to be able to really help the community understand why we're even talking about this in the first place and how it's going to benefit them, and then solve for the problem that ultimately everyone agrees is the problem.
So you raise a good point, and it's actually far broader discussion. Actually, at a national level, countries need to be thinking about what are they trying to provide their people. Now, some people want to live in a 100-meter tower or in a concrete room. Some people want to live by nature. Now, there's some overriding principles that probably governments and cities need to think about. So if we step back a second, why throughout history have people moved to cities? Probably for security, for trade, for social interaction. And it's probably no different now. But not everyone wants to live in a city, right? And that's fair enough. So if we look at it, well, we want to have a sustainable environment. Well, you can do that by going and living in a cave. But nobody wants to live like that. They want to use technology in some way, but how can we do that with having the least amount of impact? And that's where renewable energies and so on come into play. So in terms of our living stock within a country, there needs to be variety and, of course, an encouragement of people to live in a more sustainable way. Circular economy comes into play. And some of these things can be enabled by technology, right? But as I said, there's a lot of smart things you can do without any technology. There are some things that are done better with technology, and there's some things which are impossible without technology. And if we keep that in mind, then we know what it's knowing the right tool out of your toolbox to use for which problem or question you're trying to solve for.
So you might have a situation where you've derived information through IoT, and then to solve the problem, you actually don't need technology. So you
Right.
actually use technology to just get the data in and analyze it, and then you might suggest a solution which is...
Absolutely. I'm actually an aeronautical engineer by education, but I started my career in business process engineering. So I always would start from what can you do without any technology? And a lot of things, just because you make something go faster, it doesn't mean it's smart. It can change the process, could be smart. Just making the same old process go faster by some technology, I wouldn't call that smart.
But we need technology to actually assimilate the desires, aspirations of people, because it's just now impossible otherwise to know that fact. There we need technology, and then we analyze that, and then we can come out with certain interventions which may use technology or may not.
It helps, right? I mean, when we talk about, Excel's quite a powerful tool, you know. So sometimes we can do things fairly simply without having to go into, well, I need a big data platform and all of this type of stuff. You have to use the right tool for the job.
One interesting point you made an observation about people not wanting to live in caves, but one of the most interesting projects we're starting to work on at the moment is with the Indigenous communities of Australia who live in the centre of Australia, where the solution for education and health has typically been take people to cities. Our project is to take health and education to the community, where people in an extreme form can stay speaking native language, preserving their culture, help them with cultural export through technology, help them with export of art. As an example, we have a very significant art prize in Australia every year called the Win Landscape Prize. The people in the community we're working with are 2,600 people in a country of 25 million, and within 5 years, 19 of the 31 finalists in the art prize this year were from that community. Like it's properly transformational that people can stay in their communities, speak their language, have access to health and education, and maintain their culture. People are losing weight, people are living longer. People want to live in a lot of different ways, and we've got to remember what is the problem we're trying to solve for constantly. And maybe it's take the city to the people, not the people to the city is the answer.
And with that, I think back to you.
Are there any other questions? I've actually got one. So we talked about this a bit, but education. I come from a rural conservative area in America where anytime someone mentions privacy, it's government overstep, it's surveillance, it's, not acceptable. And I was just hoping that you could elaborate a little more on education in these areas where there is such hesitance to any type of what is deemed overstep. Obviously in a region like this, that's a lot easier because you have a government that can collect it and there's not a lot of room for pushback. But that's not the case in a lot of places.
Yeah, so what we're doing in terms of education, just following up what my colleague here was saying, is that we have something called a DigiTruck, where we're taking technology out to the field. As I mentioned, people want to live and work in different ways, and we should totally respect that, right? So the point about being able to also give them inclusion. Inclusion means what? So for example, we're doing a project with the ITU on Smart Village project in Pakistan. And that's to take the technology to the people where they are, because you don't want them all to come to a city, right? Because you can't. The problem why the smart city movement probably started because you got more people going to cities, and the cities can't cope with providing the basic services that they need, right? It'd be better if they were not in cities, but the point is, some people want to be in cities, right? So there's that trade-off balance. Of course, if you can provide the services to the people where they are, and they can have the least amount of impact, that's great. Now, what services do we need to provide, and how can they consume them? If people don't like the way a service is provided, you won't have the take-up. So one of the questions here in Dubai, the government came to be aware of it. There was an app for everything, but what was the usage rate? Very low. So then they tried to make it into a super app, which is probably a better idea. So how do people want to consume the service, and then how can you deliver it to them? So one side is access. So if people want to have access to education, for example, and this came out with the COVID crisis, because all of a sudden everyone had to work from home. We were lucky, at least in this region, that there was enough headroom in the networks that allowed. One of the first things I did was upgrade my home broadband because I had the kids doing their school and I was doing video calls, so we needed that capacity. So the technology is there to be able to deliver the services how people want them.
There's another bit that comes down to culture, and I know I keep not talking about technology, but there's a certain thing that makes a Parisian proud to be from Paris, that makes people wear a T-shirt of their favourite music band or sports team, and there's this intangible part about buying in that education plays an indispensable role in, that people firstly want to feel engaged, genuinely engaged, and understand what's going on. And we live in an era where there's algorithms every day trying to drive us in one direction or the other and not let us sit across the top and form a view about what's realistic. But building a sense of community where people are engaged and aware and bought in is, utterly, it's completely critical. And I mean, an example we talk about, in America there was prohibition, and not all the laws and all the attempts for enforcement made people buy into that as a concept, right? And after whatever 23 years, everyone said, enough. So this is something we need people to buy into, and there needs to be a lot more emphasis on community engagement, to your point, on explanation. The whole thing that Panasonic did in Denver failed utterly because there were no community engagement, and one day everyone woke up and there were cameras everywhere and they felt like they were living in a George Orwell novel, right? And the government was totally blindsided because they thought, we're giving these people all of this stuff, and everyone said, I don't want it. So it's a fundamental aspect, and again, at the front end, that we start with, if you want to go on this journey as a city, when we're advising them, you need to start talking to the community now and engage with all of your stakeholders to get buy-in, or it's not going to work, however good the tech is.
As the America representation here, I mean, you're absolutely right. And it's one of the reasons why, when Honeywell entered the North American business, we were really focusing on non-surveillance initiatives because people don't like it, right? But I think that's really where public-private partnerships come into play, because the government can educate all they want, right, and say, oh, this is not Big Brother or whatever, right? But that's that contingent of the population, it's not going to be a successful message. So it doesn't mean that the education isn't important. It's just, how do you educate and who does it, right? And so, the government will still continue to do that, but, leveraging, whether it's advocacy groups or industry associations, or, you've got, like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, or, those kind of other non-governmental entities that have sway and influence and respect within an organization, or rather within a city, being able to build that foundation of education from a private sector standpoint, I think does a better job than just having the government spend a lot of money on marketing to try and convince people that cameras are good.
As a non-American on the panel, if you look at the risk-benefit of surveillance to a community versus the risk-benefit of guns, and you could get behind smart city and cameras the same level of enthusiasm, I think it would be utterly transformational.
So developing countries, the governments have a responsibility to provide equality of opportunity, and the IoT is the best platform to fulfill that mandate. So I think there is an imperative that they need to use this for education to bring all segments to speed.